When night fell, medieval Europe was very dark. There was no street lighting, so cities were pretty much unlit apart from the light of the moon and the lamps that everyone had to carry around with them. In the countryside, things were even darker than that, and people frequently died falling into ditches and down stairwells. Candles that were lit to prevent this were dangers in themselves, and often ended up setting fire to houses, which would then lead on to streets and cities going up in flames. Brewers and bakers were amongst many professions that had fires constantly lit throughout the night because it was too costly to extinguish them, and on occasion they would go out of control, setting fire to the surrounding area. Just the practical darkness of the night made it dangerous, but late medieval Europeans had even more to fear from the dark hours. Christian imagery associated light with Jesus and his followers, whilst darkness, and night with it, were associated with the devil and his counter-society of imps, hobgoblins, spirits, and witches. All stories of visitations from devils and the dead emphasise that they happened at night, and when hell and purgatory were described by late medieval and early modern Europeans, they were described as places of darkness. For a European Catholic then, the night with its demons was a preview of hell itself, and its supernatural horrors did not just present physical harms, but spiritual ones too. Women in particular were viewed as being in danger of giving in to the temptations of the devil, who would come to them at night and in their dreams. Heretics too were said to stalk the darkness, partially because they would worship under the cover of night to avoid detection. Even the medieval landscape was affected, as most villages had law which cautioned that certain landmarks were touched by the devil and his minions, and were therefore best avoided, especially at night. Ponds, woods and churchyards in particular were important to keep away from, with ghosts, fairy circles and the like inhabiting them, and those who lived in these places would often have names for their local spirits, like Liverpool's Ginny Greenteeth. Crossroads too, which were customary burial sites for suicides, were often the sites of supposed apparitions. Even if you survived the temptations and terrors of the devil, the night sky itself could be cause for fear. Comets, meteors and lunar eclipses were seen as omens of God's will, or marks of his wrath, and the moon's light was thought to be so powerful, especially when it was full, that it could drive people, women in particular, insane, sometimes even causing instant death. This led to a number of deaths being attributed to planetary influence. The night air was also believed to have the ability to cause various contagious illnesses, including fevers and colds, and if you survived all of that, the mere darkness of the night could lead to danger for those travelling in it. Should you avoid falling into a ditch or down the stairs, those leaving taverns and alehouses in the evening could easily be confused for thieves in the darkness and killed on the spot, even by their neighbours and friends. Generally, courts were accepting of the right to defence against unknown figures in the darkness, as the night was seen as the playground not just of spirits and the devil, but of criminals as well. Crime was not always more common at night than during the day across Europe, but activities that would go unpunished or only be lightly punished during the day were often punished more harshly at night. Simply being a noctivigator, someone who roamed about at night, was enough to earn suspicion, and if you didn't have a good reason for being out of bed, or you didn't have a lantern, you could even be arrested. In Paris, the fine for being out without a lantern after curfew was equivalent to 60 loaves of bread, although jurors were reluctant to convict for night walking unless a more serious crime was also at play, and the night watch, who were often conscripted to their dangerous position, tended to do their jobs half-heartedly as a result. Although not necessarily more common, night crime was perhaps more violent. Gang rape, burglary and murder were more likely at night time than during the day, in cities at least, and in the countryside robbers, usually on foot rather than on horseback, would stalk the highways. Bandits were also to be feared. Burglary in the countryside was scarier than its urban counterpart, as in the wilderness you were less likely to have neighbours close by who could help. Often though, criminal enterprise was less common when the moon was bright, as criminals had a greater chance of being discovered. They would also exploit fears of the supernatural. Burglars sometimes impersonated the devil, sheep stealers masqueraded as ghosts, and thieves themselves indulged in superstition, resorting to magical amulets and spells supposed to unlock doors and keep those they burgled asleep in their beds. One of the major causes of crime was drunkenness. People in taverns, or coming back from them in the evening, would brawl with and occasionally kill each other. Premeditated murder was not uncommon on the dark streets of Europe either. In Italy, young men called bravos prowled the night as paid assassins. Of course, it would be wrong to think that fears of accidents in the darkness, supernatural horrors and crime actually succeeded in keeping medieval Europeans in their homes at night. For young men, especially servants, students and apprentices, the night was their leisure time, and they would often get it insured in their service contracts. Although drinking in alehouses, taverns and cabarets would be too expensive for most servants and apprentices, they would still go out to chat, dance, sing, visit brothels and play cards, as well as commit crime. In the countryside, the dark hours were the time when young people would court, going on walks and picnics in the night. Spinning bees in the evening, where young women would come together to spin in a single room to preserve resources, were attended by men who would take the opportunity to start courting young women, walking them home when the bee ended. Additionally, in England, France and Hamburg, many merchants, apprentices, servants and masters were up by 5:30 in the morning and working by 6, regardless of when the sun rose. Harvests would often need to be gathered as quickly as possible to avoid theft or bad weather, and as mentioned earlier, furnaces and ovens would be kept going, and were often used throughout the night to diminish the costs of lighting them. Fishermen as well had their working hours decided by the tides rather than the sunrise. All that being said, the late medieval night was a dangerous time. It was haunted by the devil's creatures who offered physical and spiritual harms, and who could find you even in the comfort of your own home and bed. Those who avoided the Prince of Darkness might encounter more natural threats at the hand of bandits, drunken students, or a simple fall down a stairwell or into a ditch. Generally, however, most medieval Europeans were in bed by 9 or 10 PM, and would wake up at 5 AM the next morning, even kings. But all of that was about to change. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's the first of a series on the cultural history of the nighttime. The next one will be about how early modern Europeans reclaimed the night from the witches and devils that inhabited it. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more content, then remember to like and subscribe. If you want to read more about nighttime in medieval and early modern Europe, then check out the sources listed in the description of the video, and feel free to drop a comment with your thoughts. And if you want to support the channel further, then check out my Patreon. I'll see you next time.